We're live.
My name is Elizabeth Weiss, and I'm the Federal Treasurer of Socialist Action and a member of the NDP Socialist Caucus Steering Committee. We acknowledge that we are hosting this event on Indigenous lands across Turtle Island, known as North America. That includes the unceded territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee people in a place called Toronto. We join in the fight for justice, recognizing that there can be no real reconciliation without restitution. That entails seizing the assets of the big resource corporations and returning them to the commons. Tonight's webcast is titled Union and the Boss's Agenda in Auto, Public Service, and Beyond. Rebekah Keetch, an auto worker in Oshawa, Ontario, examines the Unifor deals with GM, Ford, and Chrysler. Sandra Griffith-Bonaparte in Ottawa will look at the Public Service Alliance settlement with the feds. And Julius Arscott will speak on why the CLC backs Liberals. And Alberta, health service workers are under attack. Rebekah will speak for about 20 to 25 minutes. Sandra and Julius will speak up to 10. Then we will take questions from the online audience. Audience members can submit a question by accessing the webcast directly from YouTube and by typing the questions directly into the chat column. You can direct your question if you wish to one or more panelists, or all panelists can answer the questions. If you agree with what you hear during this program, please join Socialist Action by signing up at our website, www.socialistaction.ca, and by calling 647-986-1917. Easy to remember, folks. 1917 was the year of the Russian Revolution. So let's begin. Rebekah Keetch is a General Motors worker, a Unifor member, and an activist with Green Jobs Oshawa. She started at GM as a full-time temp in 2006. So-called supplemental workforce employees were kept out of the collective agreement in terms of seniority. This was done for about 10 years. In 2016, Rebekah became a full-time seniority employee in a deeply entrenched two-tier system. Active in Unifor Local 222, she was elected to the Education Committee and worked with the local's Political Action Committee. Welcome, Rebekah.
Thank you very much for having me here tonight. I guess first I'd like to set the stage a little bit about what has happened in auto over the last little while. So GM Oshawa was one of the most efficient and productive auto complexes in North America. It once employed 23,000 hourly and salaried workers. Unionized auto workers set the bar high, demanding a fair wage, a decent pension, and good benefits from the employer. The workers' perseverance and willingness to take on the employer set the stage for decades of increasing prosperity. Of course, multinational corporations like GM don't like to share the wealth and have waged a successful battle, leaving the Canadian auto industry as a shell of its former self, not just with the vastly reduced production footprint, but also gutted collective agreements. In a bid to secure production in Oshawa, significant and brutal concessions over the last several collective agreements had been negotiated. None of these sacrifices were enough to satisfy GM and provide the community with the stability and security it needed. In November of 2018, GM announced the Oshawa assembly plant would be unallocated and vehicle assembly would stop. In 2019, production ended and the last truck rolled off the line. A small stamping and aftermarket parts production was salvaged, retaining approximately 300 jobs. Thousands of workers in auto production and the supply chain were discarded. For some of the senior GM employees, there was a generous severance package to go along with their full pensions. For the rest, there were reduced pensions, forced retirements, broken bodies, unemployment, and a deep sense of betrayal. The supplier workforce was hardest hit, with most receiving a pittance for severance and over 80% with no pension eligibility. Ford and FCA workers have faced similar challenges and uncertainties. The threat of shift reductions or no future product allocations leading to the loss of jobs has been a dark cloud over the industry. In September of 2020, in the midst of a pandemic, Unifor entered into bargaining with the Detroit Three. Electric vehicle investments were announced at Ford and FCA. According to the bargaining report, Ford committed to invest $1.8 billion to retool the Oakville assembly plant and to build battery electric vehicles, following the phase out of the Edge. The retool is slated to begin in 2024, with the first vehicles forecasted to roll off the line in 2026, but hopefully sooner. It's interesting to note that just before the Ford tentative agreement was announced, it was broken in the news. There would be government investment as well in the project. According to the FCA bargaining report, FCA will invest in a state-of-the-art multi-energy vehicle platform at the Windsor Assembly Plant that will enable the assembly of both plug-in hybrid vehicles and battery electric vehicles, starting with at least one new model in 2024. This is estimated at $1.5 billion investment. It not only establishes Windsor as a leader in electrification, it also forecasts the return of the third shift in 2024, adding potentially 2,000 jobs to the current active roles. And just to note, so Windsor, they had just recently lost their third shift over the last year. And along with that, there was a loss of, I think it was around 1,500 jobs. So this isn't 2,000 new jobs. This is going to be bringing it back up maybe a little higher to where it was just recently. Although not immediate, the promise of this type of future investment provided a sense of stability to some of the Canadian workforce employed by these auto giants. The Ford agreement was approved by 81%, and the FCA agreement was approved by 78%. On November 5, 2020, it was announced that GM would be investing between $1 billion and $1.3 billion to retool and reopen the Oshawa plant for Sierra and Silverado truck production. With an expected 1,400 to 1,700 direct jobs in the plant and thousands more anticipated supplier and support jobs, this is a significant announcement for the community of Oshawa. The community has been devastated by the closure of the plant and the loss of these jobs only a year ago. GM workers in Ontario approved the contract by 85%. So what does all of this mean practically for auto workers in general and for Oshawa in particular? The highlights of the agreement are fairly straightforward. Future battery electric vehicle production for Ford and FCA, and $1 billion to $1.3 billion to support the resumption of vehicle assembly in Oshawa, which should drive 1,400 to 1,700 direct jobs starting in January of 2022. The wage progression was reduced from nearly 12 years to 8 years, and the starting wage lifted from 61.25% to 65% of the full base wage. There were some general wage increases of 2.5% in years 1 and 3 for top tier employees, and those increases will also be reflected in the base wage for second tier workers. Recall rights for low seniority workers were improved. The term of the agreement is back to 3 years instead of 4. This is significant. It will have Canadian and American auto workers bargaining at the same time. The way that it is right now, American auto workers bargain the year ahead of Canadian auto workers. A signing bonus of over $7,000 for members who performed work between January 2 and the Monday following notice of ratification. So for many laid off members, they wouldn't be eligible for that. Now, the lowlights are also straightforward and a little depressing. So I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on what the lowlights are for the Ford and FC workers specifically, but I would point out that while the future production is significant, it is some years off, and it doesn't seem that vehicles will be rolling out until 2024. This adds an element of uncertainty as there will be another round of bargaining in 2023. General Motors was able to position itself very well to the detriment of the workers. As Tony, Leah, and I reported in an article for Labor Notes, by March 2022, GM estimates there will be 1,400 to 1,700 workers building pickup trucks in the Oshawa assembly plant. 90% of them will be new hires. This is significant. Unlike Tier 1 workers who will earn around $37 per hour, these new hires will start at $23.67. That means that GM will save $33 to $42 million per year just in regular wages, not including overtime or other benefits such as a defined benefit pension, permanently lost to new hires in 2016. In addition, 15% of the workforce will be a third tier, precarious, non-seniority, full-time TPTs. That is, full-time, temporary, part-time workers. The TPTs can be kept in that status indefinitely. The contract also expands the work that will be done by employees of third-party companies inside the plant. Undoubtedly, they will start for far less than the GM starting rate. So there's been increased outsourcing of work that would have been done by traditional GM employees. In the event of a permanent reduction in force, Unifor has agreed that new workers will simply be laid off. They won't have flow rights to the other jobs in GM's Oshawa stamping and parts operations. Unifor has also agreed that no retirement incentive packages will be offered in Oshawa during the current 3-year contract. So GM can maintain operations for as long as it needs the pickup trucks and then shut down production at a minimal cost. GM will also benefit from massive savings through the local supply chain, since almost all of the supplier workers were terminated and their union collective agreements are gone. If they are even rehired, they will also start over as new hires. And most of those agreements had wage progressions that were absolutely shameful, with workers starting sometimes as low as $15 an hour, working up to $21 or $22, and taking 7 to 10 years to go through that progression. In the case of the auto industry in Canada, the corporate agenda has been very clear and very successful: to maximize profits, break the union, and reduce costs. As Tony and I also note, GM's strategy has been clear for years: outsource work, drive down wages, and use second tier, third tier, and fourth tier workers to divide the workforce. And that is, second tier workers are people employed directly by GM in a wage progression, making less money and less benefits than the tier 1. The third tier workers would be the precarious full-time temporary workforce. So they will have no seniority rights and will have no opportunity to increase their wage through any wage progression. And then the fourth tier is the supplier workers, which is basically work that has been outsourced from GM over the last few decades. So this divides the workforce and reduces costs. The latest agreement takes this strategy to the next level, and it may set a dangerous precedent for other auto negotiations in Canada. So the question has to be asked: will GM try to impose some or all of this new model in negotiations with Unifor around its Kami assembly plant next year? Kami is not part of the GM master agreement, but has its own contract that is up in 2021. Will Ford and Fiat Chrysler use the Oshawa agreement to demand similar conditions when they bargain with Unifor in 2023? The promised electric vehicle investments in Oakville, Ford, and Windsor are not scheduled to be introduced till 2024 or later. How can workers stop the whipsawing? And whipsawing is a phrase that's used when you are pitting workers, one workforce against another workforce, and as concessions are given, you use those concessions to drive further concessions from another workforce. So GM has also been clear that it plans to use the profits from the pickup production to help GM fund their transition to the electric, autonomous, and highly connected future they see ahead. Is Oshawa part of that vision? And that's something that we just don't know. But whether we are or not will directly depend on how much profit GM can squeeze out of us. So we know the boss's agenda. What is less clear is the union's agenda. In my case, my union is Unifor. The attacks on workers have been relentless, including tiered wages, loss of the fully employed paid pension, the loss of inflation protection for retirees' pensions, the outsourcing of jobs, and the expanded use of temps. The threat of closure has hung over the Oshawa facility for years. In the face of these challenges, there has been virtually no organized fight back from the union. There has been no campaign for equal work for equal pay, no fight to save the defined benefit pension, no fight to get the retirees the pension inflation protection, which was sacrificed in 2009 to keep GM afloat. The number one aim in bargaining is securing jobs through securing product, which of course leads to concessions. The most frustrating part of this process has been the union itself has been party to selling these concessions and strategies to the membership. They have taken an active role in defending these actions rather than trying to mount any type of alternative strategy. And I mean, an example of that is when each tentative agreement was announced with the three auto companies now, it was described as a home run, as a fantastic, successful round of bargaining. And although there were some gains made, the success was in product announcement, in product investment, not in making major improvements to the intensification of work that we've faced, or to the wage progression. I mean, it's significant that there's improvements to the wage progression, but an 8-year wage progression is still a multi-contract progression, and the company is making record profits. All of these concessions since 2012 have been agreed to and accepted against the backdrop of these auto companies making continuing record profits in the billions of dollars. So the union must start organizing workers to fight for basic union principles and abandon any notion of there being a team concept or collaboration with the corporation, because we are not on the same side. It was depressing and frustrating to hear Jerry Diaz take time during the Oshawa announcement to acknowledge GM CEO Mary Barra and other GM executives, recognizing them for working with the union to, as he said, find a real solution. The problem with this is the only problem that GM was looking for a solution to was how to meet production for the forecasted truck demand and make more money. They were not looking for a solution for the community of Oshawa. We are dealing with international corporations. We must prioritize building meaningful solidarity with workers globally. There is a lot of work to do on this front. Right now, leadership is still focused on competing for product. We need to find a way around that. There is no chance of stopping the race to the bottom without building global solidarity. And I mean, it's problematic. You know, one of the key components of Unifor's fight back against the closure announcement was a boycott on Mexican-made vehicles, and it was a problematic thing to do at a time when Mexican workers were under attack and trying to fight back. And like, there's no way, like, if we wouldn't do the boycott on GM across the board, they said, because it would hurt other GM workers. So if it would hurt other GM workers, why are Mexican GM workers different? And I believe this is an unintended consequence. I believe that Unifor was very invested in trying to mount a fight back to keep the plant open. Whether I agree with the tactics and strategy is a whole nother situation. But the unintended consequence of this is that that it opens the door to attack workers, and it decreases our opportunity to build global solidarity instead of increasing it. So in many ways, the union fight with the auto companies reminds me of the Black Knight from Monty Python in the Holy Grail, which I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. He was guarding a short plank of wood over a small stream and refuses passage to the king who wishes to cross. During a sword fight in which he loses both of his arms, he will not acknowledge defeat but cries, "It is only a flesh wound." As the fight continues, the king chops off both his legs, but still the knight will not accept defeat and says, "All right, we'll call it a draw." Instead of constantly claiming victory, even as we are beaten, perhaps we should change how we are fighting and fight for something bigger. Our words and our actions must reflect the reality that workers see every day. Having said this, I want to acknowledge all of the truly amazing workers and activists that are in Unifor. I am critical of my union leadership because I love my union and I believe in its ability to be a powerful force for social change. We are in an industry that will be severely impacted by climate change, technology, and productivity advancements. We need to create a compelling vision for the future and fight for a just transition as we leave a carbon-based economy and move to a green economy. We need to think bigger and fight bigger. The loss of auto jobs in Canada and the climate crisis have been worsening for decades. We see this coming and we must take a proactive approach to address these challenges. While product announcement for Canadian auto plants is good for the short term, it is not a long-term strategy that will fight for climate sustainability and social justice. Thank you very much.
Elizabeth, you're muted.
Oh, I didn't mute myself either. Sorry about that. Sandra Griffith-Bonaparte emigrated in 1988 to Canada from her native Grenada in the Southeast Caribbean. When she got a job in the Federal Public Service, she became involved in the Union of National Defence Employees, a component of the Public Service Alliance of Canada. As president of PSAC, Local 70607, for 12 years, Sandra's outstanding leadership attracted envy and hatred from some white members in her region, especially when she gained accolades as a union spokesperson and educator on subjects like Black History Month. Her bigoted opponents, mainly from locals outside her own, filed false charges of harassment against her. The UNDE brass removed her from office for 10 months, but Sandra returns as president of Local 70607 on January 1st. Sandra is a member of Socialist Action in Ottawa. Welcome, Sandra.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. My name is Sandra Griffith-Bonaparte, as you heard, and I'm just going to give some highlights about the Public Service Alliance of Canada and negotiation that we recently had. The Public Service Alliance of Canada represents nearly 100,000 federal public service workers under the Treasury Board of Canada in every province and territory in the country. Our hard-working members provide the backbone, according to PSAC, of Canada's public services, protecting our borders, providing vital social services, and ensuring our vast lands and oceans are safe and comfortable. Collective bargaining is how the union, which is the bargaining agent and management, come up with the terms and conditions of employment for the workers involved. Provincial or federal labor legislation set a rules for how these negotiations take place and how disputes are handled. Each bargaining agent also has rules about how the negotiation on behalf of the members. During the bargaining period, each component sends out a call-out letter for bargaining proposals from all locals. After the review of the bargaining proposal, Each component will choose members from the locals to attend the bargaining conference, where each table will choose members to form the bargaining team. Then the fight will begin with the employer. I should say negotiation. Just to talk a little bit about our locals. Our locals form the foundation of our union. And the local is where members connect to the union. It is where they go for help. Like you have a local president, a local executive vice presidents, and you have shop stewards, and where they vote on proposed contract settlement. Local may form a component. Component bring together members who work for the same government department, agency, or territorial government. And I belong to the Union of National Defense Employees, which is a component of PSAC representing approximately 18,000 public and private sector workers at D&D establishment and facilities across Canada. The Union of National Defense UND members work in a wide range of occupation, which includes laborers, firefighters, ship crew, a whole slew of them, and even like in cleaning services, food services, etc. UND works with the members and the bargaining agent, PSAC, to obtain fair treatment and respect in the workplace, employment security, fair pay, and benefits and safe working conditions. So on July 9th, 2020, after 2.5 years of negotiation, our PA team finally reached a tentative agreement with Treasury Board. Our bargaining team unanimously recommends ratification of a new contract. And so during that period, the total compensation increased for all PA group members amongst the effective June 21, 2018, we got a 2.8% increase. Effective June 21, 2019, we got a 2.2 increase. Effective June 21, 2020, we got a 1.35. And if you ask me if that was enough, I would say no, but I guess it's a negotiation and PSAC settled. So alongside negotiations for the PA group, we have PSAC bargaining team for the TC group, we have the EB group, we have the SB group, and D&D in National Defense, and let's say Department of National Defense, we like to use acronyms. And these groups reach a settlement with the Treasury Board. The PSAC demanded a one-time payment of $500 in recognition of the extended collective agreement implementation deadline, and an additional $50 for every subsequent 90 days delay. 10 days of paid domestic violence leave. Better language on return to work following a maternity or paternity leave, giving more flexibility to parents who wish to change position within the federal service, public service, and also improvement to parental leave pay. Also, we had updated language to match the new legislation, including a new extended leave option and the sharing of parental leave. And so a whole slew of things. Another one is new memorandum of understanding to explore the issue related to childcare in the public service. Updated and improved language to match the new legislation on compensation, care, and caregiving leave. And so Treasury Board has 180 days from the date of the signing the new collective agreement to raise the pay according to the new rates, and we have all this outlined in the new collective agreement. Provide retro pay for the time elapsed since the expiry of the old contract, and also to pay $500 as a penalty for extended implementation timeline. So how did, let's go to the pandemic now. How did PSAC handle the pandemic? You know, from March of this year or even February, we had a nasty pandemic in this country, and it's still raging and getting higher and higher every day. So if you ask me the question, how did PSAC handle the pandemic? So during the pandemic, PSAC asked the employer for permission for a large number of its members to work from home. And so I think about 70% of members are working from home. PSAC said that there is a general duty of all employers to take all reasonable precaution to prevent harm to employees in the workplace. And I know of a few people who are getting in trouble, but PSAC is working with the employer, and some people are filing grievances when the employer wants them to come to work and put themselves in danger. PSAC also is asking employers that the employer should have a detailed plan in place to deal with this pandemic, and also specific protocols, including providing personal protective equipment for workers and the necessary training to use and dispose of the equipment. How much time I have? Still have a lot of time?
I have about 3 minutes.
Okay, so I'll just go straight to, Elizabeth mentioned that in December of 2019, while attending a UND local president's meeting, I was verbally attacked by a group of racist and sexist and bigoted local presidents, mainly men. And of course, I defended myself in a very, very respectable manner and walked away from that meeting, without any malice or bad intentions. The harassers filed a harassment complaint against me, and an all-white kangaroo investigative committee was set up. And of course, I was suspended for 10 months. But brothers and sisters, I said to myself that this too shall pass. And guess what? It's passing, because come December 31st, 2020, it will pass, and my suspension will be lifted. My suspension will come to an end, and I will resume my position as the president of UND Local 70607. Today, I would like to say, and I said it over and over and over again, a hearty thank you to Barry, who represented me very well and really supported me during those trying times. I met Barry of the Socialist Action at an OFL convention. I think that was in 2019, was it? No, 2018. And I was very impressed with Kurt, and I can't remember the other presenter, and they did very well during the election for the OFL president, and I think Kurt ran for the vice president, and they spoke very well. So I wanted to know who they were, and I went up to them and I talked to them, and they told me they were having a meeting in the evening, and I decided to attend, and I attended the meeting, and I was impressed with what I heard. And so I got in contact with Barry, and the process started there. And today I'm a part of Socialist Action. What I want to say in closing is that, as Socialist Action preaches and purports, let us stand with other workers in the fight to build the party of the working class, and also to raise class consciousness of the workers. I really want to thank you for listening to me, and good evening to everybody.
Okay. Thank you, comrade. Our next panelist is Julius Arscott. He was elected to the executive board of the Ontario Public Service Employees Union in 2017 and is now first alternate to the board from the Toronto region. He is also vice president of OPSU, a local 532, in the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change. Julius lives in the Bain Avenue Co-op. He is on the steering committee of the Workers' Action Movement and the NDP Socialist Caucus. He is a leading member of Socialist Action League for Action Socialists. Welcome, Julius.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I just got to correct you. I work for the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. Ford got rid of climate change because apparently that's all he needed to do to get rid of the issue of climate change was to remove the name from our ministry. So just for reference. I want to talk about a couple of things. One is the situation that workers are facing in Alberta, and the second is the issue.
You're not on camera. You know that, eh?
Sorry?
You're not on camera. Not for
No?
me.
Our audience can see him. It's
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry
Okay,
about
great.
that, comrade.
No problem, no problem. So firstly, Alberta. So on October the 18th, the United Conservative Party adopted a plan for a privately funded, privately managed healthcare system to operate alongside the public, the Public Alberta Health Services, or AHS. The decision comes hard on the heels of the announcement by Alberta Health Minister Tyler Shandro on October 13th of massive AHS outsourcing that will result in the layoff of 11,000 employees. And of course, for folks who may not know, Alberta right now is a hot spot for COVID-19. The layoffs are part of the UCP initiative to privatize healthcare. Jobs will be lost due to outsourcing of vital supports such as food preparation, laundry, housekeeping, and community lab services. Coupled with an outright private option for healthcare, the cuts will devastate Alberta's public healthcare system by diverting money into the pockets of private companies and slashing workers' wages in the sector. Shandro repeatedly said that AHS layoffs will not affect frontline nurses during the pandemic. However, a letter sent October 13th from Lee McEwen, Executive Director of Negotiations and Labor Relations of the AHS, to United Nurses of Alberta, or UNA, or the UNA, outlines that AHS plans to cut 500 full-time equivalent jobs. Union reps say that this will result in up to 750 nurses being laid off. These attacks on the AHS and its workers are no surprise, as a UCP government has consistently passed anti-labor legislation, such as Bill 1 and Bill 32, since 2019. At the same time, the UCP provided $4.7 billion in corporate tax cuts, resulting in lost revenue to Alberta's treasury. Shamefully, the UCP now attempts to compensate for lost billions with a measly $600 million saving plan that will cut and outsource vital healthcare jobs in the midst of this pandemic. Bill 1 threatens demonstrators with fines of $10,000 for protesting on what is considered essential infrastructure, a deliberately vague stipulation that could apply to a picketer or any sidewalk or building entrance. Bill 32 introduces many anti-labor benefits to employers, such as allowing bosses to unilaterally impose wage averaging on employees, while extending the range of these agreements from 12 weeks to 52 weeks. It also restricts the rights of unions and imposes significant negative changes to the Employment Standards Code. And Bill 47 introduces changes to the Workers' Compensation Act, going after injured Albertans and worker safety. Limiting workers' right to, basically it would limit workers' rights to refuse unsafe work. It would cap the amount that injured workers can receive. It ends presumptive PTSD coverage for most workers, and closing the Fair Practices Office, which injured workers get the help that they need. Wage averaging means that an employer can calculate overtime worked over days where there was no work or less work, so that it is no longer considered overtime. So if someone works a 16-hour workday and it's followed by a 0-hour workday, they would be deemed to not have gone into overtime hours. There would be no overtime hours. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney's UCP is pushing for an American-style private healthcare system and for corporate control of Alberta's assets. In the face of so many blatant attacks on Alberta workers and the public sector, unions such as the Alberta Union of Public Employees, the Alberta Federation of Labor, and UNA, the UNA, are on the move. And Kenney's numbers in the poll are very low. On October 26th, wildcat strikes led by frontline AHS workers erupted across the province to protest the announced cuts. Militant energy spread across the province, with hundreds striking in over 45 towns and cities. The following day, the AHS got a court injunction which ended the walkouts. The AFL, the Alberta Federation of Labor, announced a province-wide campaign against the UCP government, including plans for mass strikes, even mentioning a general strike. it declared the UCP anti-Alberta. The AFL launched a public website for joint action, which you can check out. It's www.standuptokenny.ca. But patience with the cuts is shrinking fast. Socialist Action urges all workers, unions, NDP electoral district associations, women's, senior students, tenants, LGBTQI migrants, and community organizations to unite. Now is a time for escalating mass protests, up to and including a general strike to smash the attacks on the working class and its allies. Stand up for labor rights and for a public, top quality healthcare system. Kick out Jason Kenney and the UCP. I also want to talk about the Canadian Labour Congress and recent developments there. On November the 3rd, 2020, the United Steelworkers Union issued the following statement. Late on Friday, October 30th, the Canadian Labour Congress, without consulting any union affiliate, announced a joint endorsement with the business lobby group, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, a former Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, for the role of Secretary General of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, or the OECD. This was a shocking action by the CLC, which is responsible for speaking on behalf of working people, defending and strengthening the rights of workers. The CLC and its leadership team has roundly failed workers in its co-sponsored endorsement of Morneau. The USW, its Canadian leaders and members are outraged by this irresponsible and ridiculous action by the CLC President Hassan Youssef, and so should we all. As Federal Finance Minister, Bill Morneau put forward Bill C-27, which had it been successful, would have imperiled retirement security for Canadians and set workers and pension plans back decades. Morneau was also a key part of a government which interfered in collective bargaining by legislating postal workers back to work, botched paying federal employees with the much maligned Phoenix system, and took numerous other actions that show Morneau has not been on the side of working people. Partnering with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce without the input of any CLC affiliate is also deeply troubling and shows a disregard for the labor unions that form the CLC. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce is a body that has historically pushed for anti-worker policies that would either halt progress or set working people back. It's time for a leadership change at the Canadian Labour Congress that prioritizes the needs and concerns of working people over its own self-promotion. The USW leaders and members are demanding better from our national labor leaders, and good on them. Socialist Action shares the concerns expressed by the USW. Many labor activists believe that CLC President Hassan Youssef is a prominent proponent of so-called strategic voting that favors Liberal Party candidates at general elections, and that he's angling for an appointment by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to the Canadian Senate. How long will the CLC go? Youssef's undemocratic action deepens decades of retreat by the organized labor movement. It undermines the independence of the working class as a whole in relation to the parties of big business. The USW is correct to declare it's time for a leadership change in the Canadian Labour Congress. Socialists call for the removal of class collaborationist union bureaucrats like Youssef and a complete break with strategic voting. Moreover, the situation demands labor affiliation to the New Democratic Party and a stronger fight for socialist policies inside the NDP and the unions. Class struggle leadership is urgently needed to challenge neoliberal austerity, pandemic disaster, and environmental catastrophe in the workplace and on the street. If you wish to push for progress in that direction, please contact the Workers' Action Movement. We're hoping to launch an electoral campaign as well as put forward resolutions for the upcoming CLC convention, whenever that will be. Stay tuned, check us out on Facebook, and you can also check us out on our website at www.thewham.ca. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, comrade. All right, so we're going to go to Kurt now, who's going to put 3 questions. He will read the first 3 questions out, and then he'll put them in the chat. And each panelist has up to 5 minutes to answer these questions, 1, 2, 3, or none. It's up to them. And the lineup will be Sandra will go first, then Julius, and then Rebekah. Kurt?
Okay, so our first question comes from Barry Weisletter, who asks, governments spend workers' tax money to lure the auto bosses into production without even requiring them to produce green mass transit and personal vehicles. When will unions demand public ownership under democratic control and in the public interest? Of course, socialism in one plant or one industry is impossible, so demands for green energy vehicles must be tied to control of the whole economy. I asked, how do we bridge the gap between the multiple tiers of workers so that they cannot be pitted against each other to drive concessions? And Daniel Tyrett asks, how dramatic was the impact of NAFTA on union bargaining in Canada?
Okay, so we'll first go to Sandra. You have up to 5 minutes to answer any or all of these questions. Go ahead, sister.
I'll let somebody else go before me.
Okay, Julius, you're next.
Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, I guess I wanted to talk, like the first issue that Barry brings up is, I think, a very important one. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I know that Rebekah has campaigned on the issue of transitioning the Oshawa plant into manufacturing green vehicles, which are much needed. What I will say is that I think that the role of socialists and labor militants within our unions is to demand more from our labor leadership. It's our prime focus has to be on building a democratic labor movement that will be willing, essentially, will be pushed into supporting the kind of green transition that we need in terms of our support for public ownership and green manufacturing. It's absolutely necessary. Barry's right, we can't have socialism in one plant. But I'd like to hear more of what Rebekah has to say before I go into that anymore. Kurt brings up an important issue, is tiered bargaining. I think that, you know, and I'm a member of OPSU, and every time you go into bargaining, every time that there's a concession, and there often are concessions, because concessions bargaining is the norm in the workers' movement today. We argue about the fact that the reason why most of these contracts should be rejected is because of the creation of tiered workers, which means workers who are doing the same work and being compensated differently, which is totally unfair. So even if, and we remind people that even if folks think that, well, I don't want to necessarily vote in favor of a strike vote for something that they think may not necessarily be that important. At one point, if the trend for concession bargaining continued, that minority becomes, or that majority becomes a minority as the new people come into the workplace and have no incentive to put their livelihoods on the line for the minority workers who have been compensated more. And that is the whole point of tiered structure, is divide and conquer. So tiered bargaining, concessions bargaining has to always be opposed. It needs to be called for what it is. And I'm glad that the situation that Sandra has been dealing with for quite some time is coming to an end, although I think it's important to note that the issue of systemic racism within the labor movement, never mind society at large, but within the labor movement, is very real. It needs to be challenged in every local and in every union. So I think I will stop at that. Daniel had some questions about NAFTA and the effects on bargaining. I think that, you know, free trade in general free trade agreements in general have had negative impacts on workers, as union bosses and governments and employers argue that you know, that they're tied in terms of not being able to give increases to workers due to international legislation and trade agreements. It's bullshit because, of course, ultimately power is with the working class, and we can move mountains if we feel compelled to, but we are consistently held back by the labor lieutenants of capital. Thank you.
Okay. We'll now go to Rebekah. You have up to 5 minutes.
Okay. I guess the first one that I'd like to talk about is how do we bridge the gap between multiple tiers of workers? The first thing that I'm learning that is critically important is that the workers themselves need to stand up and fight for themselves. If you're going to wait for somebody else to fight for you, it likely isn't going to happen. If you stand up and say it isn't right that we're getting paid different wages, then you will have other people come and join you in your fight. But if you just and I say this from experience because I started in the auto industry in 2006 as a second tier worker. I didn't get hired until 2016 as a seniority employee. And through that time, the wage progression has become entrenched. And what people would tell me is that it's how it has to be. We had a gun to our head, and this is what the companies demanded in place of production. But I mean, once we start accepting that logic and the logic of concessions, it is a race to the bottom that can't be stopped. The only way to stop it is for workers to start demanding fair treatment and better conditions. And unions will respond to workers that are fighting, right? The union isn't going to necessarily do something just because it's a theory or a principle. It would be nice if they did, but that's just not the reality of things. They tend to be responsive to what the membership is pushing. So the first thing is that you have to fight for yourself. And then the second thing is that anybody who's in a higher tier, and I think Julius talked about this, that it is in your interest as a top tier worker to fight for the people on the bottom. Because what happens is as those people on the bottom become a increasingly large size of the workforce, there's nobody left to fight for you. And I mean, it's it's poisonous. I mean, this is happening to our retirees. Our retirees used to have a thing called PCOLA, which was a pension index, and the union would regularly negotiate inflation protection for the retirees. And that hasn't happened. It hasn't happened since 2009. They lost it, and it's not even on the bargaining agenda anymore, I don't think. But how can it be when they don't even have a defined benefit pension plan now for their new workers? And how can it be when they have a 10-year which is now an 8-year wage progression, and they have to spend time bargaining to improve the law of the people at the bottom instead of everybody fighting for the same things? So the tiering is really, really destructive, and it needs to be fought against with everything that we have. The issue with public ownership and unions getting on board with that is a really pretty complicated. Like in auto, we are so married to the idea that we're working for auto companies and that's the way that they produce cars. And there's been such a successful attack on public services and public ownerships. Like, we have to frame it in context of what's been happening for the last 40 years. Government overheads attacked, unions are attacked, public services are attacked, privatization is encouraged. So one of the things that needs to happen is that we need to really start having conversations about the value of public ownership around a wide variety of things, and a broader conversation about what a real mobility or transportation strategy for climate change will mean. It's really problematic if we think that corporations, which have been a large part of the problem in getting us into this climate problem through their disregard for the environment and their constant seeking for profit, it's very problematic to think that they're going to save us from the climate crisis by making battery electric vehicles. And to just add, for the NAFTA, I don't, I'm not sure what the impact was. NAFTA itself has decimated manufacturing in Canada, and I'm making the assumption that the changes in the agreement that happened over the last couple of years, and I'm not sure if that really had any impact that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you, sister. Okay, we'll go back now to Sandra. Do you wish to answer one or all of the questions?
No, I want to answer all the questions. Are you hearing me? So I'll answer Kirk's question. You know, in my country, we say it's a dog-eat-dog world. And it's the same thing in Canada, because you have everybody, at whatever strata they are, everybody is fighting for his own self. They're not thinking about me down here or you up there, I guess, except for Socialist Action. So it's very hard for me. I think it's very hard to bridge the tier. But we need to, as the previous speaker said, we need to stand up. We need to speak up. We need to be strong. We need that. There's power in numbers, and we need to stand up and shout. And you know, when people hear us, they listen. When our unions hear us, if we shout, if we make a lot of noise, they'll respond to us. But if we're silent, and a lot of people are silent, then nobody's going to speak up for us. Nobody's going to hear us. So nobody will be listening to anybody. So we need to stand up. We need to speak out. We need to support one another. And as the speaker before said, the people on top need to support the people below. And if we each hold each other's hand, then we'll be going places.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're going to go back to Kurt now for 3 more questions. And you will each get up to 5 minutes to respond. And the speakers list will be Rebekah, Julius, and Sandra. So, Kurt, 3 questions.
Okay. Our first question comes from Mark Lister. He says, is Green Jobs Oshawa pushing for nationalization, expropriation of the GM plant, and a shift to a worker-controlled organization to produce BEVs? Elizabeth Bice asked, our host, where does your union leadership stand on CLC leader Youssef supporting Morneau? And Ellen Ramsey asks, are public and private sector unions under the same attack right now, or is one sector doing better than the other?
Okay, Rebekah?
So Green Jobs Oshawa recognizes the very real and significant impact that the announcement of restarting truck production has for workers in the community in Oshawa. So we are not at this moment pushing for GM to stop production and be pushed out for nationalization. But what we do think is that GM has shown that they are willing to abandon Oshawa as soon as it doesn't maximize their profits. And that we should be continuing to look at alternatives and strategize about how to be ready for the future. The idea of conversion, public ownership is a really important component. It allows us to meet social demand instead of profit. So these are things that we are still focusing on right now. As far as the union leadership standing on the CLC, so I'm with Unifor. Unifor is not affiliated with the CLC anymore. However, Hassan Youssef was made leader when he was a Unifor member. So I'm not sure that there has been any public comments on that. And I think that private and public sector unions are both under attack viciously from their employers.
Okay, thank you, Rebekah. Julius?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. So I'm going to start with Elizabeth's question about where does your leadership stand with the CLC. To be honest with you, I don't think that there has been a strong statement that's been put out rejecting it. My union operates through NUPCHI, and I believe that they put out a statement rejecting the decision that was made. As for the officers of the Canadian Labour Congress, as far as I know, the only person who's actually spoken out against it is Marie Clark Walker, and I may be wrong on that, but it took her several weeks to do it publicly. So, I think that she said she came up publicly after the Steelworkers came out with their statement. So I think my impression is that it's a very unpopular move amongst most folks, but I don't know. Perhaps in the background, there probably is some action in the background in terms of running candidates against. I mean, he's gone after the upcoming convention anyway. But I think that there's a real disappointment with the slate that was elected to the CLC, and regardless of who's going to be running, it seems that most of the folks who have put their name forwards are attached strongly to the labor establishment, and that's why the Workers' Action Movement is going to proceed with a rank and file campaign to run for the top positions. That's our hope, anyway. Ellen asked, are public and private sector unions under the same attack now? I mean, I think the public sector unions have been under attack for a long time. A lot of private sector unions have had the benefit that their workers are at the point of production, and it's not as that's not necessarily the case with a lot of public sector unions. When Unifor goes on strike, they when the Oshawa plant was running normally, you drop your tools and that's it. There's no more production, and it's easier for people and the public, I think, to understand the power of a private sector union as opposed to a public sector one. Although, it's not necessarily a limitation. People know how strong, for instance, the teachers' unions are. If only they would use that power more often. There was a huge opportunity last year for the teachers who were all in bargaining in the province of Ontario, all at the same time, for them to go out and start a general strike, which is something that we were campaigning for in the Workers' Action Movement, and we pushed really hard along with a lot of allies at the OFL convention. And while we did not win our multiple efforts to pass a motion to the effect of language that would be in favor of general strike action, our candidates received resounding support. Barry Conway received 36% support, and Kurt Young received 34%. And for a rank and file campaign, it's unprecedented, and we saw it as being very successful.
Okay, thank you, Julius. Sandra? Unmute yourself, Sandra. Unmute yourself.
You hear me now?
Yes,
okay.
I can.
Mark, I don't have an answer for the green jobs in Oshawa. Elizabeth, I personally don't know where PSAC stands in regards to Yusuf. What I know is that they revere him. Yusuf, as a matter of fact, has been revered by, he has been made an honorary member of PSAC to be able to stay in the union as the president. And as Julius said, he'll be leaving soon. But personally, I haven't heard anything. I haven't heard any statement from anybody about his the decision he made. Yes, so that's it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're going to go back to Kurt now for our last round of questions. And the lineup will be Rebekah, Sandra, and Julius, and you have up to 5 minutes.
Okay, so our first question comes from Barry Wiesletter. He asks, the lack of openness, transparency, and accountability in bargaining by unions makes it difficult for rank and file workers to take control of their unions and their destiny. What should be done? And Elizabeth Spice asks, workers are saddled with a conservative pro-capitalist leadership that dominates most unions. Without organizing a class struggle opposition from the bottom up, how can meaningful change occur?
Okay, so that's the two questions. So there's only two, so you have up to 6 minutes now, if you wish, to answer. And it's Rebekah, Sandra, and Julius.
I'll take Elizabeth's question first. And I think that the simple and straightforward answer is that that if there isn't organizing around class struggle from the bottom up, that no meaningful change can occur or will occur. I think that's pretty straightforward. Just hoping for change to occur isn't going to work. And if it isn't organized from the bottom up, if it isn't the union membership that's pushing for it, then there's going to be very little that will force leadership change. The question around openness and transparency and accountability in bargaining, that's one that's close to my heart. So how auto bargaining is done is so for GM Oshawa, they ask people to fill out a sheet of paper with their 3 top demands. They take these 3 demands and compile them into a list that they say is going to be the bargaining priorities as determined by the membership. Of course, on the list that they handed out, number 1 was already filled in with, I think it was securing product. So that's sort of a bit of a frustration. But then it goes behind closed doors. You don't get to hear any of the details or what's going on with bargaining. You'll get updates that are extremely general, and they will almost certainly tell you that bargaining is difficult and challenging. The employer is putting forward a lot of demands, but the union is taking a strong stand, and they will keep you updated, which is not a very useful update. And then what happens is Unifor makes an announcement to the media that a tentative agreement has been reached and does a press conference in which the media can ask questions. And then on the following Sunday, they hold a ratification information meeting where they provide you with a highlight sheet, which contains a massive amount of information by the time the questions are asked. You can't reasonably go through this sheet and digest and come up with the questions that need to be asked at the ratification meeting, and then you vote. So what should be done is that either there's 2 ways of doing it. Bargaining either needs to be made more open and transparent, where the members are able to get regular, meaningful updates about what the employer is asking for, what the union is asking for, what are the challenges that are faced. I mean, this would be more useful if there was organizing campaigns between bargaining to talk about things like fighting for equal pay for equal work, because members would be interested on what's happening with that particular fight, or making improvements to a pension plan. What's happening with that fight, because they've been invested in it, they've helped to organize and fight. In the absence of that, if you're going to continue to keep bargaining closed, then you have to provide the collective agreement and the language for people to look at it. And you have to give them time to look at it and come up with questions and have the collective discussions about what are the implications of this language. Is this something that we're willing to accept, or is it something that we think they need to fight back with? It's a difficult process to change. And so I think there was around 17,000 active auto workers. We got a petition signed by, I think, 1,700, so almost 10% during COVID, and sent it to the Unifor Leadership asking for full contract disclosure, and we received no response. So that's a struggle to move forward, and it's just, I mean, anytime you want change, you have to organize.
Okay, thank you, Rebekah. Sandra? And unmute yourself, please. Sandra?
Okay, am I on?
Okay, you're on. You're
Yeah.
on.
So in my union, how bargaining is done, and I said it before, we send out a number of bargaining proposals because the component would ask for the bargaining proposals. And as a local, you would sit down with your membership and you could come up with all the different proposals that you need to send to them. And my problem is not the proposal, is when you send a proposal, my problem is not the openness and transparency. Well, yes, that's a problem too. But for me, once we send the proposal, and if the president of the component or the president of PSAC doesn't like the proposal, guess what? It's not going forward. So I have a problem with that. I remember sending a proposal for limited term office, terms of office, limited term office, and they didn't like that. And so that one was thrown in the garbage. So I had a big problem with that. And I remember sending a proposal at PSAC, and the president of PSAC didn't like the proposal. They didn't think this was a good proposal, and so they threw it, away. And so as members on the ground, we need to take an animal farm action. As members, we need to, as I said before, we need to stand strong, because if we don't let our voices be heard, then nobody will be listening to us. We have to make the unions accountable. We are the unions. We are the people on the ground. We need to take back our places in the union if we want to see change. Yes, if we want to see change, if we want to have this openness, if we want things to be transparent. And as in my union, so we'll have a bargaining conference, okay? You choose the members at the bargaining conference, you'll vie for the position. Once you choose, so I'm in a PA group, and once you choose these people, then you'll have PSAC will have a big conference. So the different components will be fighting for the positions. And they go in, they discuss, and of course, we hardly hear anything. So I don't know, we need to fight more to get this openness. We need to fight more to make the union accountable to us, because the fact of the matter is we pay them their salaries, and without us, they wouldn't have a salary. So I say fight, fight, fight.
Okay. Thank you, sister. Okay, Julius.
Yeah, great. Fight, fight, fight. I totally agree. Bargaining is the bargaining process is one of the most important parts of what a union is all about, and it's also one of the most important tools in mobilizing the membership of the union. Rebekah gave an example of how the leadership of Unifor basically prevented any in-depth look at the agreement before the ratification vote took place. Another tactic that was used in my division in the Ontario Public Service was a push for basically it was a continuation of the status quo of the rollover agreement of the collective agreement. That was done without any consultation with the elected bargaining team. These processes are done purposefully to demobilize the membership, because a mobilized membership is a threat to the leadership of the labor movement. So anybody who thinks that that the leadership is just being that they just don't know how to do their job needs to really look at the reality that these decisions that are made by the leadership are done on purpose. We do need to fight the labor misleaders, because they are really, what they're doing is they're destroying the labor movement. I just looked at an article that the Financial Post put out glorifying Jerry Diaz. You can check that out. It's dated November 30th, 2020. Jerry Diaz, the $5 billion blue collar man. But there is something useful in it. And there's a graph there that shows the percentage of unionized workers in each province. And Ontario is has one of the lowest unionization rates in Canada, next to Alberta. Alberta has 24.6% of workers are unionized, and Ontario is 26.3. So there's a lot at stake. And so what I would say is that, the role of workers should be to get involved with your locals. Don't act like, the current leadership, if they're no good, that they somehow have a right to those positions. If you're a dues paying member in your union, you have a right to be there and to voice your opinions. And we need to do that outside of bargaining as well, because a lot of the work really is all the time. And a lot of locals are not even, you may not necessarily come up against a whole lot of opposition because the rank and file is so demobilized that there might be a local just sitting there waiting for you, most of these decisions, depending on the way that your union works, but many of the decisions when it comes to concessions bargaining are made at a higher level, and you can do a lot with a local. So I'd encourage folks to get involved with their locals and get involved with the workers' action movement, because really it's difficult to stand by yourself and fight the leadership in the labor movement. And it's good to have a team of people to work with, because you need reinforcements. There's a lot of games that get played. I was on the OPSU executive board, and I'll tell you, it was one of the most toxic experiences I ever had. I was on it for 2 years representing Toronto, and I ran as a socialist. It was important work, and it's work that we need to do, but it's having a support network is very important. And so stay tuned for the work that we're doing in WAM. And if you want to get more involved and talk about some of the bigger issues, such as capitalism in general, and how really this situation that we're dealing with in the labor movement is a product of capitalism, join Socialist Action. We're involved, obviously, in the workers' movement through the Workers' Action Movement, in the Labour Party, the New Democratic Party, and we're doing stuff all the time, and we're growing. So there's a crisis with the system, with capitalism, that more and more people see every day. We're growing. Join us.
Thank you, Julius. Okay, in fact, a special thanks to Rebekah, Sandra, and Julius, and also to our producer, Kurt Young in Mississauga, and to everyone who participated in tonight's conversation. Please consider buying a subscription to Socialist Action. I hope you can see it. Socialist Action newspaper is only $27 for 1 year, delivered to your door. Or you can order one of our pamphlets, which this one is Capitalism Isn't Working. We have many. So all you need to do, if you want to get in touch with us, to fill out a form. Just visit our website at www.socialistaction.ca. Or if you would like to talk to us about joining SA, write to socialistactioncanada@gmail.com, or just give us a call at 647-986-1917. That's 647-986-1917. And once again, folks, if you like this show, please subscribe to the Socialist Action YouTube channel. The next SA webcast is on Thursday, December the 10th, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard, and it is titled Capitalism, a Crime Story, featuring Harry Glaspeak, Professor Emeritus and Senior Scholar, Osgoode Hall Law School, York University, plus discussant Stephen Ellis, an activist and a lawyer specializing in employment and human rights law. And also at this time, I would like everybody listening to know that Socialist Action is running a candidate, Corey David, in a municipal election on January the 15th. Yes, Corey is running for the position of City Councillor in Ward 22, Scarborough Agincourt. And if you want to get involved by giving up a little time or making a donation, please call 647-986-197. So in the meantime, folks, please stay safe, stay healthy, and be active. Bye for now.